Why was everyone ignoring her at the gate? That question lingered in Sarah Chen's mind as the black sedan rolled to a stop before the base checkpoint. The morning sun stretched across the tarmac, painting the military compound in gold and steel. She stepped out quietly, boots hitting the ground with a muted thud. No salute, no greeting, just a distracted wave from the guards, their eyes glued to a conversation about weekend plans. She offered her identification, calm and expressionless. The corporal glanced at it for half a second, stamped something on a clipboard and handed it back without a word. If he noticed the weight in her stare, he didn't show it. Good, she thought. Let them see what they want to see. She asked for this anonymity. No arrival ceremony, no fanfare, no crisp line of saluting soldiers, just another new face stepping onto the base. At 28, she was younger than most believed an admiral could be. Too young, they whispered in Pentagon halls. Too unconventional, too silent. But command had chosen her for a reason, not for the medals, not for politics, but for the way she saw systems others didn't. The cracks, the corners no one cleaned. The quiet rot beneath the surface. And she wanted to see it here, unfiltered. The sedan drove off, leaving her standing alone with one duffel bag, heavier than it looked. She adjusted it on her shoulder and began walking toward the heart of the base. Around her, soldiers moved in clusters, some efficient, some distracted, a few laughing louder than discipline should allow. The air smelled of diesel, iron, and something older, fatigue. Sarah's gaze swept across supply trucks idling in line, drivers tapping on dashboards as they waited for clearance. Too long a delay, a bottleneck, a habit gone unnoticed. She made a mental note. In command, habits mattered more than reports. She passed barracks and warehouses, her steps unhurried. She looked like a transfer, invisible, unimportant. And that was exactly the point. She wanted to know how this base functioned when nobody was watching. Inside the personnel office, fluorescent lights hummed like flies. The room smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. Behind a scratched counter sat a middle-aged sergeant with gray-streaked hair and the tired eyes of someone who had processed 1,000 arrivals before breakfast. Sarah handed over her papers. The woman didn't look up. "Transfer from Fleet Command, huh?" she muttered, stamping forms automatically. "You'll be in temporary quarters, junior officers building, 3rd floor, end of the hall." "Thank you," Sarah said simply. Her voice was even, the kind that never needed to raise itself to command attention, though few here would recognize that yet. The sergeant slid a plastic badge across the counter. "Temporary ID. You'll get your permanent one once your assignment's official." Sarah nodded, accepting the badge that falsely identified her as a logistics assistant. The sergeant barely looked at her face. Another stamp, another name in the system, another oversight she'd remember. 5 minutes later, Sarah was standing in her assigned quarters, a narrow room with a single bed, metal desk, and window overlooking the training fields. The walls were thin, she could hear laughter and muffled voices from the next room. The space smelled of detergent and cold air. She set her duffel down, unzipped it, and began unpacking. A few civilian clothes, notebooks, a compact sidearm, and beneath them, sealed documents marked confidential, base command transfer directive. She closed the flap. That would stay hidden for now. Her reflection in the small mirror above the desk looked like that of a new recruit. Hair tied neatly, face composed but ordinary. Only her eyes gave her away, sharp, restless, evaluating. As evening approached, she stepped out and headed toward the mess hall. If you wanted to understand a unit's spirit, you started where they ate. The dining hall buzzed with conversation, laughter, complaints, the clang of trays. She joined the line, blending in easily. Her tray carried simple food, potatoes, chicken, something resembling green beans. She sat near the back, choosing a table with a clear view of the room. There were unspoken borders here. Enlisted personnel at one side, officers at another. Little mingling, little curiosity. Conversations drifted from duty rosters to rumors, from weekend leave to broken vending machines. No talk of mission readiness. No spark of shared purpose. Just routine. At the next table, a group of young lieutenants were deep in debate over a new training protocol, complaining about idiotic updates that slowed operations. One of them, a sharp-featured man with restless energy, leaned forward. "Whoever came up with these new logistics guidelines doesn't know what the hell they're doing," he said, shaking his head. "Paperwork doubled, comms slower, and nobody even explained why." His friend laughed bitterly. "Bet it's another desk officer trying to look productive." Sarah lifted her cup, hiding a faint smile. She knew exactly who had written those protocols she had. But their frustration wasn't arrogance. It was proof. Proof that communication was breaking down between the top and the people doing the work. That gap, that silence could cripple a command. She didn't interrupt, she listened. When the room started to empty, she stood, disposed of her tray, and slipped out into the night. The air was cooler now, brushing across her face as she walked along the perimeter fence. Floodlights hummed. The rhythmic crunch of gravel under her boots echoed softly. She watched guards in their posts, some alert, some distracted. Cameras blinked red, yet she noticed blind spots where a trained eye could slip unseen. Another note, another crack in the system. It wasn't judgment she felt, it was responsibility. She'd been handed this command because of what she could see before it failed. But observation wasn't enough. Tomorrow, she would start learning why these cracks existed, not just where. Back in her quarters, she turned off the light and sat in the darkness, letting the silence fill the space. She thought of her past commands, ships under fire, decisions made in seconds that changed lives forever. This assignment was different. It wasn't about survival. It was about rebuilding trust. Her phone buzzed once. A secure message, observation period, 5 days. Reveal authorization, T-minus 120 hours. She set the phone down. 5 days. 5 days to walk among them, learn their habits, and see the truth before the uniform spoke for her. Dawn came with the sharp call of reveille echoing across the base. Sarah dressed in standard fatigues, identical to everyone else. No insignia, no rank. She joined the morning formation among the junior officers, a sea of faces facing the rising sun. A captain read announcements in a monotone voice, eyes glazed over as if reciting a grocery list. Around her, soldiers shifted their weight, bored, unfocused. A few whispered quietly. No one cared enough to silence them. This, she realized, was how complacency sounded. Not loud, not dramatic, but dull. After formation, her assignment came through. Report to Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, Administration Wing, Room 214. Jackson was older, silver hair, stiff posture, a man whose loyalty to procedure was both his strength and his weakness. When she entered, he looked up, offering a distracted nod. Transfer from Fleet Command, Logistics Support. Yes, sir. He flipped through her file, the falsified one. Looks in order. You'll report to Major Williams for logistics coordination. We're behind on requisitions and she needs help. Yes, sir. He didn't question the vagueness of her record. Didn't ask why a supposedly low-level transfer had arrived with classified clearance codes buried in her paperwork. He just wanted the help. She thanked him and moved on. The logistics office was a storm of noise, phones ringing, printers clattering, officers moving between desks. Major Williams, red-haired and sharp-eyed, barely looked up as she motioned Sarah over. "Chen, right, take that corner desk. You'll be processing supply requests. We're drowning here." Sarah slid into the seat, scanning the pile of paperwork in front of her. Requisition forms, backlogs, duplicates, all signs of a system running on habit rather than efficiency. Within minutes, she noticed patterns, redundant steps, unclear approvals, missed deliveries. "Ma'am," she said softly after an hour, "why do all requests route through both procurement and operations for approval?" Williams looked up, frowning. because that's the process. But they approve the same criteria. Williams hesitated, then sighed. Yeah, it's dumb. Been that way since before I got here. Sarah nodded quietly. That's what happens when no one questions old ghosts, she thought. By afternoon, she'd processed more forms than anyone expected from a new transfer. Williams glanced over once, impressed. Good work, Chen. Keep this up, and I might actually take a lunch break this week. Sarah smiled faintly, glad to help. During lunch, she wandered down to the motor pool, an ocean of steel and grease. Mechanics worked beneath armored vehicles, sleeves rolled up, music playing softly from a radio. She asked questions like a curious newcomer, not a commander. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a man with oil-streaked hands and honest eyes, was quick to talk. Parts shortages, ma'am, always. You ask for brakes, you get batteries. You ask for engines, they tell you to wait 2 months. Why? He laughed bitterly. Because no one up there knows what down here looks like. She nodded, watching him tighten a bolt on a Humvee axle. The scent of metal and sweat filled the air. What would you fix first if you could? She asked. He paused, meeting her eyes. Communication, between the people doing the work and the people making the decisions. That night back in her quarters, Sarah couldn't shake that line. Communication. The same word she'd heard in every struggling command she'd ever been assigned to fix. It was never just about resources or rules. It was always about people not being heard. She took a deep breath, looking out her window at the lights flickering across the base. Tomorrow she'd dig deeper. The foundation of this place was strong, but cracks like these didn't form overnight. There was still time to understand. Still time to see who this base really was before they found out who she really was. Why did silence always come before trouble? Sarah felt it that morning, a quiet unease that lingered between the clatter of keyboards and the whir of ceiling fans in the logistics office. The day began like any other. Coffee cups, paperwork, distant echoes of marching drills outside. But beneath the ordinary, something was off. She could feel it. Major Williams was already at her desk, shoulders tight, fingers tapping too fast across the keyboard. "We've got a problem," she muttered before Sarah could even sit down. "Communications division's throwing a fit, says their equipment. Been down for weeks because parts never arrived." Sarah blinked once, feigning curiosity. "Parts?" "Critical ones," Williams said, rubbing her temples. "Without them, we're operating on half capacity. Command relays are lagging. If we had an emergency alert, response time would be a nightmare." Sarah kept her expression calm, but inside her pulse quickened. In her hidden reports to the Pentagon, she'd noted inefficiency and apathy, but this was something else. A base with crippled communications wasn't just inefficient, it was vulnerable. At that moment, the office door slammed open. Captain Brooks stormed in, tall, red-faced, voice already raised. "Williams, I've been chasing this order for 2 damn weeks. You people lost it." "Captain, calm down," Williams said, standing. "We've been trying to." "Trying?" he scoffed. "My systems are dead in the water. The supplier says it shipped. Logistics says it didn't, so which one is lying?" Sarah pretended to focus on a form, letting her gaze lift subtly. The captain's tone carried more than frustration, it carried fear. If communications failed, his department would take the blame. Careers could collapse overnight in the military when failure found a name to attach to. Williams looked exhausted. "We're still investigating, the parts should've." "Should've doesn't fix my system," Brooks snapped, slamming a folder on the desk. "You people don't understand what's at stake here." The room went silent except for the faint hum of computers. Sarah looked up finally, meeting his eyes just long enough to steady him, calm, neutral, unreadable. He turned away first. That was always how it went with her. People didn't know why, but they obeyed quiet authority when it showed itself. After Brooks left, slamming the door behind him, Williams sank into her chair. "This base," she sighed. We're always one lost form away from disaster. Sarah glanced at the folder Brooks had left. Inside were incomplete delivery receipts, mismatched tracking numbers, conflicting supplier IDs. Layers of bureaucracy tangled like vines. She recognized the pattern immediately, a system designed by people who'd never worked inside it. "Major," she said softly, "would you mind if I help trace this?" Williams gave a dry laugh. "Be my guest. If you can make sense of that mess, I'll personally buy you dinner." Sarah nodded, eyes sharp now. Challenge accepted. By midday, she'd mapped the entire procurement chain from request to regional distribution to final delivery. It was worse than she'd thought. Redundant approval loops, lost data, outdated tracking software, and inconsistent verification logs. Somewhere in the maze, the shipment had disappeared. Her instincts told her it wasn't sabotage. It was apathy, 1,000 small failures stacked until they looked like one big mystery. Still, she needed proof. During her lunch break, she made her way to the communications facility. The building was cold, humming with low power and flickering lights. Inside, Sergeant First Class Thompson was hunched over a console, frustration etched across his face. He looked up when she entered, eyebrows raised. "You lost, ma'am." "No," she said, smiling faintly. "I'm from logistics. Heard you were having trouble." He sighed. "That's one way to put it. Half our systems are offline. Backup relays are stretched thin. If we needed to transmit an emergency code right now," he shook his head. "Let's just say I wouldn't bet on it." Sarah walked closer, eyes scanning the hardware complex, but not beyond her understanding. "You submitted multiple priority requests, right?" "4," Thompson replied. "Each one bounced around like a damn tennis ball. We even had approval from command, but nothing ever showed up." "Show me the requisition trail." He pulled up the system logs. Sarah stood beside him, studying the entries. She could see where it all went wrong, a transfer from central supply to regional depot marked completed, but the final delivery status read unverified. That meant someone had signed for it, but not here. "Sergeant," she asked quietly, "how much of your array is still functional?" 60%. "And in an emergency?" He looked at her. "We'd be lucky to reach anyone." She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that answer. A 60% communication network was a silent disaster waiting for a headline. "Keep this between us," she said softly. "I'll see what I can do." Back in the logistics office, she pulled up the supplier list. One entry caught her eye, a warehouse in another state with a nearly identical name to theirs. Same region, same code prefix, slightly different identifier. She frowned, tapping her pen against the desk. It was an easy mistake for someone rushing through forms. Too easy. She called the supplier directly. "This is Chen from Base Logistics," she said smoothly. "I'm checking on shipment number 4729B. We've been told it was delivered, but our inventory shows nothing." "Hold on," the man on the line said, typing. "Ah, yes, delivered 3 days after dispatch. Signed for buy. Let me see, Lieutenant Grady." Sarah's tone didn't change. "Lieutenant Grady isn't stationed here." A pause. "Wait, this is Port Riley Base, right?" "No," she said quietly. "This is Port Rayleigh." Oh, another pause. "Well, that explains it. Looks like the shipment went to the wrong installation." She closed her eyes for a second, exhaling. Of course, one missing vowel, one lazy verification check, weeks of chaos. "How long to reroute it here?" "We can overnight it once we confirm authorization." "Do that," she said firmly, "and mark it priority. I'll send clearance now." Within an hour, she had coordinated both depots, arranged expedited transport, and documented every error that led to the failure. Her hands moved fast but steady, calm efficiency born from years of command she could not yet reveal. When she walked over to Major Williams's desk, the woman looked up, bleary-eyed. "I found your missing shipment," Sarah said simply. Williams blinked. You're kidding. No, wrong base. It'll be here by morning. Williams stared for a moment, processing. Then she leaned back, letting out a half-disbelieving laugh. You've got to be joking. That thing's been stuck in limbo for weeks. Sarah smiled faintly. Sometimes the problem isn't the system, it's the people using it. Williams shook her head. You're wasted in logistics, Chen. Sarah shrugged. Maybe, but I like fixing things. Word spread fast. By evening, everyone in logistics knew the new girl had solved a 2-week crisis in half a day. Officers stopped by her desk, curious, whispering. She kept her responses brief, humble. Let them wonder. Let them talk. That night she was invited to a small gathering at the recreation center, off-duty officers unwinding over pool and cheap beer. The lights were dim, the music low, the atmosphere loose. She went not to relax but to listen. As she walked in, conversation paused for a moment, the unfamiliar face still new to them. Then it resumed. She found a spot near a corner table, sipping a soda, pretending to half listen to the radio while catching fragments of talk around her. New training regs, total mess. Heard commands sending someone big to shake things up. Like they ever care what happens down here. A group of junior officers nearby were deep in discussion about leadership. Frustration, cynicism, fatigue, it was all there. They make decisions up top without even asking us, one said. Then they act shocked when things fall apart. Another added bitterly, I stopped making suggestions. Doesn't matter what you say, they'll do whatever looks good in a report. Sarah's gaze drifted to the floor for a moment. She'd heard this before in every base, every ship, every broken unit she'd been sent to fix. The words changed, but the meaning was the same. People who'd given up on being heard. At another table, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez spotted her and waved. Hey, Chen, over here. She smiled, joined him, and played a few rounds of pool. He was better than he pretended, though he lost deliberately once or twice just to keep the game going. As they played, the conversation turned casual, jokes, frustrations, laughter that came easier than it should have. But then someone mentioned her name again from across the room. That new girl in logistics, the one who fixed Brooks's comms mess. Rodriguez grinned, told you she's sharp. Sharp, another voice said. She's dangerous, makes the rest of us look lazy. Laughter followed, but Sarah caught the tone. Not all of it was admiration. Some was discomfort, the kind people felt when someone upended the usual rhythm. She leaned on her cue, watching the balls scatter across the felt. Change always looks dangerous, she said softly, until it saves you. Rodriguez tilted his head, curious. You talk like a commander sometimes. She smiled faintly, old habit. Later that night, walking back under the quiet hum of streetlights, she found herself alongside Lieutenant Colonel Jackson. He was carrying a folder, clearly returning from his office. He nodded politely. Chen Wright from Logistics. Yes, sir. I've been hearing about your little miracle with the comms shipment. She shrugged modestly. Just luck, sir. Luck or competence, either way you'll go far here. He paused, looking at her more closely. Where did you transfer from again? Fleet Command, she said easily. He smiled faintly. Ah, that explains it, you have that look. What look, sir? The look of someone who's seen how things are supposed to work, and doesn't like how they don't. She couldn't help but smile, something like that. They walked in silence for a few moments before Jackson spoke again, his voice lower, more tired. You know, sometimes it feels like this place is held together with duct tape and denial. I try to fix what I can, but there's always more than time allows. Then why stay, sir? She asked gently. He looked up at the floodlights. Because someone has to. His honesty struck her, the quiet burden of a man doing his best with limited reach. She respected that. But she also knew what he didn't, that soon someone else would carry that weight. someone who could change the system itself. When they parted ways, she stood for a while under the stars, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The base was asleep, unaware of the shift already happening. Inside her quarters, she opened her encrypted log. Her fingers typed without hesitation. Observation log day 3. Communication crisis resolved, systemic issue, not individual failure. Personnel morale low but salvageable. Leadership competent but constrained by bureaucracy. Potential high. Time remaining before reveal, 48 hours. She paused, staring at the final line. 48 hours until everything changed. She closed the log and looked out the window one last time. The base lay quiet, silver under moonlight, imperfect, flawed but alive. There was something almost fragile about it. Something worth saving. And soon, they'd know who was already saving it. What do you do when silence hides something darker? That was the question that haunted Sarah Chen as she entered the logistics building on her 4th morning. The base was already awake, engines growling, radios hissing, boots marching in rhythm, but there was a different tension today, subtle and sharp. People spoke in hushed tones, doors closed faster. The air itself seemed to carry secrets. When she stepped inside, she found Major Williams mid-argument. Her voice was tight, controlled but cracking at the edges. Across from her stood Captain Peterson, tall, crisp uniform, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "I'm telling you," Williams said, holding up a file, "the numbers don't add up. 3 units of computer equipment signed out but no delivery receipts, no confirmation. And the units listed as recipients deny ever requesting them." Peterson crossed his arms. "Clerical error," he said smoothly. "Old system glitches all the time." Williams slammed the folder shut. "This isn't a typo, Captain. This is missing property." Sarah paused by the doorway, pretending to review her clipboard, though every word cut through her composure. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Peterson's expression tightened, but he kept the arrogance of someone too comfortable in his position. "If you think there's misconduct, Major, file it properly. Until then, stop wasting my time." Williams' jaw clenched. "You'll get your report." He turned sharply and brushed past Sarah on his way out. For a split second, their eyes met. His glance was assessing, not curious, not suspicious yet, but aware. She made sure hers revealed nothing. When the door closed, Williams exhaled hard and leaned on her desk. "That man," she muttered. "I swear, if he spent half as much time managing his depot as he does deflecting blame." Sarah spoke gently. "You think it's deliberate?" Williams hesitated. "I don't know, but this base has been bleeding inventory for months. Tools, electronics, sometimes whole shipments just vanish. Command calls it paperwork errors. I call it negligence." Sarah nodded slowly, her mind already turning. Negligence or theft disguised as incompetence. She'd seen it before, in smaller commands where oversight was weak and morale weaker. A single officer manipulating records could skim equipment, resell it, and hide behind the noise of bureaucracy. But she couldn't act. Not yet. She still had a day left under cover. Her orders were explicit: no early reveals, no interference unless lives were at risk. And yet, how many lives depended on a functioning, honest supply chain? That afternoon, she asked Williams for permission to visit the depot, just to learn how the process works. The major nodded, grateful for the help. "Go ahead, maybe a fresh pair of eyes will see what we've missed." The depot sprawled across several hangars at the far end of the base. Forklifts rumbled between rows of crates. Workers in sweat-stained uniforms moved with mechanical rhythm, scanning, signing, stacking. But beneath the motion, Sarah noticed irregularities: a door propped open where it shouldn't be, an access terminal logged in but unattended, security cameras blinking with lazy intervals. At the loading dock, she met Staff Sergeant Kelly, a friendly face smudged with grease and sun. "New transfer," he he asked, adjusting his cap. She nodded, trying to learn the ropes. He smiled. Welcome to the land of lost shipments. What do you want to know? Everything, she said, her tone light. Walk me through the process. Kelly obliged. He explained how incoming deliveries were checked, logged, distributed, or supposed to be. As he spoke, Sarah traced the chain mentally. The procedures looked solid on paper, but his description revealed cracks. No secondary verification, no automatic cross-checks between digital and physical logs, and long stretches of unsupervised access. What about high-value items? She asked casually. Depends, Kelly said. Some stuff gets locked up, others just get a barcode and a prayer. She raised an eyebrow. A prayer. He grinned, though uneasily. Well, let's just say some officers are better at paperwork than oversight. His tone changed when she mentioned computer equipment. The color in his face shifted slightly. His answers grew vague. Can't say much about that batch, he muttered. Captain handles those directly. She smiled politely, thanking him for his time, but her thoughts were already racing. If Peterson personally oversaw those shipments, he'd have ample opportunity to manipulate records. And Kelly's reaction, that small flicker of fear, was confirmation enough. By late afternoon, Sarah volunteered to help process new shipments, taking position near the receiving desk. Her eyes cataloged every action, the rushed signatures, unchecked seals, boxes moved without verification. When one crate labeled restricted, electronic equipment arrived, she noticed that no one even scanned it before moving it to the back room. Don't we log those separately? She asked a nearby corporal. He shrugged. Usually, Captain said he'd handle those. Of course he did. That evening she lingered after hours, pretending to finish reports while covertly observing. Peterson appeared around dusk, clipboard in hand, moving through the aisles like a man who knew which cameras to avoid. She watched him sign off on inventory sheets without checking contents, occasionally slipping smaller packages into a locked cabinet. The pattern was methodical, too neat to be casual. Sarah's instincts flared. This wasn't negligence. It was theft, organized, confident, and invisible under the right lighting. Her first impulse was to confront him. Her second, the wiser one, stopped her cold. She was Admiral Chen yet, not officially. One wrong move now would compromise the entire operation, and a man like Peterson, cornered too soon, could erase evidence or bury his trail before the investigation began. So she did the hardest thing a leader could do. She waited. That night, the base recreation center hosted a movie screening, one of those small events meant to keep morale steady. Sarah went, not for the entertainment, but for the conversations that came with dim lights and unguarded laughter. She sat among enlisted personnel, quiet, listening. The film played, some old war drama full of speeches and gunfire, but the real story was in the murmurs around her. Heard Peterson bought a new car. Yeah, must have hit the jackpot. He said something about investments or inheritance. Right, because everyone inherits a $90K sports car on a captain's salary. Laughter rippled through the group. Sarah smiled faintly, though inside every piece was falling into place. The missing shipments, the unexplained wealth, the nervous subordinates. When the movie ended, she stayed behind, helping clear trays just to listen a little longer. Another soldier, younger, spoke quietly to a friend. You ever notice how Peterson's always here late? Lights on in the depot after everyone's gone. Yeah, his friend replied. He says he's catching up on paperwork. Paperwork doesn't echo. That line hit her like a bell in the dark. She left the recreation hall, the cool night wind carrying the faint smell of jet fuel and salt from the distant coast. Walking the perimeter, she replayed every detail in her mind. The stolen shipments weren't just about greed. They reflected a system that allowed silence to hide corruption. She thought of every face she'd met, Williams fighting to hold her department together, Rodriguez working double shifts with broken parts, Thompson patching comms with duct tape and hope. They deserved better leadership. They deserved accountability. But for now, she had to keep pretending. Back in her quarters, she locked the door, turned on her encrypted tablet and began typing. Observation log day 4. Evidence of possible theft and data manipulation in supply depot. Security protocols inconsistent, multiple blind spots observed. Captain Peterson primary suspect. Recommended, immediate audit upon assumption of command. Objective, preserve cover. No confrontation until official authority confirmed. Her hand hovered above the keyboard. It wasn't easy to record injustice and not act. But patience, she reminded herself, was part of leadership, especially when the stakes were invisible to everyone else. She encrypted the report and sent it through a secure relay to Pentagon oversight, a prearranged signal that something serious awaited her command authorization. Then she sat in the silence, the hum of the base faint beyond her window. She'd seen corruption before, but never so quiet, so polite, so confident. The kind that thrived not because people were evil, but because no one was watching. And tomorrow, everyone would be watching. Her cover would end. The rank would return. The truth would step into daylight, and with it, the reckoning this base didn't know it needed. She stood and faced the window, watching the lights of the depot flicker in the distance. Peterson was still there, still working late, still unaware that the woman he'd dismissed as a nobody would soon be the one to decide his fate. The reflection staring back at her wasn't the quiet transfer anymore. It was an admiral in disguise, carrying the weight of patience and justice in equal measure. Sarah whispered softly to herself, not a promise but a truth. Tomorrow, she said, the silence ends. How do you face people who saw you as nothing, when they're about to learn you were everything they should have respected? Sarah woke before dawn, her heartbeat calm but deliberate. It wasn't nerves, it was focus, the kind that came before something irreversible. Outside, the base was already stirring. Engines hummed, boots echoed, banners fluttered in preparation for the afternoon ceremony, the change of command. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, her uniform laid neatly beside her, not the plain fatigues of a nameless transfer, but the immaculate dress blues that carried weight, legacy, authority. Admiral Sarah Chen. For 5 days she had walked these grounds unseen, listening, learning, absorbing the truth hidden beneath protocol. She had seen the quiet decay, the good people drowning under bad systems, the lazy disguised as loyal, the sharp minds dulled by bureaucracy. But she had also seen hope. Williams' grit, Rodriguez's honesty, Thompson's persistence. People still fighting, even when no one noticed. Today they would notice. As she dressed in her standard fatigues one last time, she caught her reflection. For a moment, she didn't see the admiral or the operative or the tactician. She saw the young woman who had started her career fixing coffee machines on a ship because the senior officers didn't think she could handle command. The woman who had learned that silence, used correctly, was more powerful than shouting. Her phone buzzed with a final encrypted message. Authorization, active. Reveal window 1300 hours. 5 days of anonymity had ended. The morning passed with electric tension. The base buzzed with speculation about the incoming commander, some expecting a hardliner, others a reformer. No one expected that the quiet transfer they'd been working alongside was already here. At formation, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson addressed the troops. His voice carried over the courtyard like a drumbeat. Listen up, ceremony at 1300, parade ground, dress code, full uniform. We're welcoming our new commanding officer this afternoon. Let's show them the discipline and pride this base stands for. He meant every word. He had no idea he was speaking to his future commander. Sarah kept her expression neutral, standing shoulder to shoulder with junior personnel. To anyone looking, She was still just another officer following orders. When the assembly broke, she caught fragments of conversation. Nervous excitement, gossip, doubt. I heard the new commander from Fleet Operations. Some big brain from DC. Or a politician, probably another one of those. Whoever it is, hope they don't start changing everything. She almost smiled at that last one. By late morning, she excused herself from logistics duties and returned to her quarters. The door closed behind her with a quiet finality. She set the temporary badge on her desk, its plastic edge scratched, its lettering faded. It had done its job. She opened her locker. Inside, her true uniform waited like an old friend. The navy blue caught the light as she drew it out, metals polished, insignia gleaming. The silver stars on her shoulders reflected the morning sun pouring through the window. As she fastened the last button, she felt the shift, not in authority but in purpose. For 5 days she had walked as an observer. Now she would walk as a leader. The command building was already filled with activity. Senior officers hurried between rooms, aides carried folders, and junior personnel scrambled to finalize seating arrangements. When Sarah entered, the air seemed to pause. Sergeant Martinez, the same woman who had barely looked up during Sarah's check-in, was carrying a stack of documents when she saw her. The papers slipped from her hands. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to the stars on Sarah's collar, then back to the face she suddenly recognized. "Good morning, Sergeant," Sarah said evenly. Admiral," Martinez stammered. "Ma'am, I didn't." Sarah raised a hand gently. "You treated me exactly how I asked to be treated. No apologies necessary." Martinez nodded shakily, still processing the sight of the woman she dismissed as a routine transfer, now walking past her with the quiet authority of command itself. Inside the main office, Colonel Harrison, the outgoing base commander, stood near the window reviewing notes for the ceremony. He turned, smiling politely, then froze. Recognition dawned. "Admiral Chen," he said, recovering quickly, offering a salute. "I must admit this is unorthodox." "It was necessary," she replied. "I wanted to see the base as it truly is, not as reports describe it." He chuckled softly. "You've certainly made an impression. Half the staff thinks you're the most efficient lieutenant they've ever had." "Then I did my job well," she said, smiling faintly. Their conversation shifted to logistics, reports, and personnel. He outlined ongoing projects, his tone respectful, professional. Beneath it, though, was curiosity. "You saw things I didn't you?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "Enough to know this base doesn't need new rules, it needs new trust." When they left together for the parade ground, the sun was high, bright enough to make the polished brass of uniforms gleam like mirrors. Hundreds of personnel stood in perfect formation, the air filled with the hum of engines, the faint ripple of flags. Rows upon rows of soldiers, officers, mechanics, and medics, all waiting for the arrival of the new commander. And she was already there, walking beside Colonel Harrison toward the platform. The reaction was almost visible, a wave of confusion rolling through the ranks. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers began. "That's her." "No way." "Wait, that's the new transfer from logistics." It spread like wildfire. The new girl who had eaten with them, worked beside them, solved their problems in silence, was wearing an admiral's stars. Sarah stepped onto the dais, posture straight, eyes calm. She didn't need to command silence, it came naturally. The murmurs faded until only the rustle of flags remained. Colonel Harrison delivered the formal words first, passing command with the usual ceremony, the exchange of insignia and authority that marked the transition. Then it was Sarah's turn. When she spoke, her voice carried, not loud but steady, each word deliberate. "I walked among you for 5 days," she began, "not as an admiral but as one of you. I saw how this base operates when no one's watching. I saw dedication, skill, and pride. I also saw frustration, confusion, and moments where complacency had quietly replaced vigilance. Her eyes moved slowly across the crowd, meeting faces she knew: Williams, Rodriguez, Thompson, all frozen, disbelief mixing with respect. "This base doesn't need perfection," she continued. "It needs awareness. It needs honesty. It needs people who will speak up when something's wrong and leaders who will listen when they do. From this moment forward, you have both." She paused. The wind caught her hair for a second, lifting it like a banner. Change will come, not from punishment but from understanding, from accountability, from the belief that excellence isn't built on fear, it's built on trust. The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward but reverent. It was the kind of silence that comes when people realize they've misjudged someone who never needed to prove herself in the first place. When the ceremony ended, applause didn't come immediately. Instead, the first sound was a single soldier stepping forward and saluting. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire formation stood at attention, the sound of hundreds of boots striking pavement echoing across the field like thunder. The reception afterward was less formal, but the emotional weight lingered. Officers and enlisted personnel moved hesitantly at first, unsure how to approach the woman they had once treated as a peer or, in some cases, ignored entirely. Major Williams approached first, face pale but proud. "Ma'am," she said softly, "if I'd known." "You weren't supposed to know," Sarah interrupted gently. "You did your job, Major, and you did it well." Williams swallowed. "Thank you, Admiral. Your leadership kept things moving when the system failed. I noticed that." Williams blinked, caught off guard. "You noticed." "I notice everything," Sarah said simply. "That's why I'm here." Next came Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. He grinned nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Ma'am, I didn't exactly talk to you like an admiral." "Good," Sarah replied. "You talk to me like a person. That's rarer than you think." He laughed, the tension easing. "Still feels strange, ma'am, having someone up top who actually listens." She smiled faintly. "Get used to it." Around the room, the mood began to shift, from shock to pride, from uncertainty to respect. People whispered her name with something close to awe. The new admiral had walked among them, lived with them, helped them. But not everyone was present. "Where, Captain Peterson?" Sarah asked quietly, scanning the room. One officer cleared his throat. "He was called away on short notice, ma'am. Said something about urgent supply matters." "Of course he was." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her voice cooled slightly. "Have him report to my office tomorrow morning, 800 hours sharp." "Yes, ma'am." When the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped low over the horizon, Sarah walked the quiet halls of the command building until she reached the office now bearing her name. She stepped inside slowly. The space was larger than she expected: wide desk, panoramic window overlooking the same parade ground where she'd stood that afternoon. From this view, the base looked disciplined, flawless. But she knew what lay beneath that perfection: the blind spots, the overlooked workers, the silent frustrations. She set her cap on the desk and sat down, the leather chair creaking softly. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a breath. Her first order as commander was already written. Initiate full audit of supply depot operations. Priority 1. The second, handwritten and personal. Schedule private meetings with Major Williams, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, and Sergeant Thompson. Implement findings from observation week immediately. Her third note was simpler still. Captain Peterson, pending investigation. She leaned back, watching the lights flicker across the base she now commanded. Outside, soldiers were still cleaning up after the ceremony, voices carrying faintly through the evening air. Her gaze softened. For all its flaws, this place was alive again. The undercurrent of fatigue she'd sensed when she arrived was gone, replaced by something new: anticipation. Change had begun the moment she took that first silent step onto the base, pretending to be invisible. Now, invisibility was no longer required. She whispered to herself, voice low, steady, almost reverent. Authority means nothing if you can't first understand those you lead. And as night fell over the field, the base lights shimmered like a constellation below her window. For the first time since her arrival, Sarah allowed herself to smile, not out of triumph, but quiet certainty. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. What happens when power stops being a disguise and starts becoming a responsibility again? The first dawn under her official command felt different. It wasn't quieter or louder, it was sharper. The base seemed to move with a strange awareness, like every pair of boots that struck the pavement now carried purpose. People stood straighter. Salutes came quicker. Eyes followed her now, not with suspicion but with curiosity, respect, and guilt. Sarah Chen walked across the main courtyard in full uniform, cap tucked neatly beneath her arm. The weight of authority wasn't heavy, it was familiar. What felt heavy was the silence she could sense behind her. Conversations paused when she passed. Officers adjusted their collars. The same people who once dismissed her as a new recruit now avoided meeting her eyes. That was expected. Change always began with discomfort. Inside the command building, her new assistant, a young ensign, waited nervously with a stack of folders. "Ma'am, good morning, your schedule's full." "I'm sure it is," Sarah said softly, taking the top folder. "Send Captain Peterson in first." The ensign hesitated. "He hasn't arrived yet, ma'am." Sarah looked up. "He will." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. By 800 hours, the door opened. Captain Peterson stepped inside, eyes carefully neutral. His posture was textbook military, rigid, controlled, but his palms betrayed him, slightly damp where they gripped his clipboard. "Captain," Sarah said without looking up from the papers in front of her, "you're late." "Apologies, Admiral, I was handling." "You were instructed to arrive at 800 hours, not after." Her tone wasn't sharp, it was precise. "Sit down." He obeyed. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the quiet shuffle of paper. Then Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. Her expression was unreadable. "Captain Peterson, you've been overseeing supply depot operations for how long?" 18 months, ma'am. "And in that time, you've managed an inventory discrepancy rate of 12%, nearly triple the acceptable limit." He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am, but—" "During the same period," she continued, voice calm, "several high-value shipments have gone missing. Computer equipment, tools, electronics, items later discovered sold through private channels." Peterson blinked, trying to mask panic. "Ma'am, if you're implying—" "I don't imply, Captain." Her eyes were steel now. "I confirm." She slid a folder toward him. Inside were photos, transaction records, and a summary from military investigators, activated the moment she'd assumed command. His signature appeared on several falsified receipts. Peterson's composure began to crack. This must be a mistake." "It's not," Sarah said quietly. "You've had months to clean your trail. You didn't realize someone had already seen it." He froze. "Seen it?" "Yes," she said, leaning back slightly. 5 days ago, you handed me a clipboard. You told me those numbers were clerical errors. You were right in a way, they were, just not the kind you can fix with paperwork." For a long moment, the room was silent. Finally, Peterson tried again. "Admiral, please, if I could just explain." "Explain what?" she interrupted, her tone steady, not cruel. "The car outside the gates, the missing electronics, or how you built a system around silence because you knew no one above you was paying attention." He had no answer. Sarah closed the file. "Captain Peterson, you are hereby relieved of duty pending formal investigation. You'll remain confined to quarters until Military Criminal Investigation Command arrives. Sergeant Miller will escort you." She pressed a button on her desk. The door opened. Two MPs entered wordlessly. Peterson stood, trying to salvage dignity, but the look in his eyes was empty. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you'll ruin my career." Sarah met his gaze one last time. "You ruined it the moment you stopped serving the people under your command." He left without another word. When the door closed, Sarah sat in silence. She wasn't angry, just tired. The kind of tired that came when justice finally replaced restraint. Her comm unit beeped. "Admiral Major Williams is here." "Send her in." Williams entered briskly, eyes alert but uncertain. "Ma'am." "Major, sit." Sarah handed her a report. "Peterson, under arrest. Theft confirmed. Supply depot will need immediate reorganization." Williams blinked. "Already?" "I don't believe in waiting for clean desks before fixing problems," Sarah replied. "You're assuming temporary oversight of depot operations, full authority until further notice." "Understood." Williams hesitated. "Ma'am, may I ask something?" "Of course." "You planned this from the beginning, didn't you?" Sarah smiled faintly. "No, I planned to understand. The rest came after." Williams leaned back, exhaling. "It's strange. I thought leadership meant barking orders. Turns out it means seeing what no one else does." "It means both," Sarah said softly. "But sight without empathy is just surveillance. We lead by earning honesty, not demanding obedience." Williams nodded slowly, letting that sink in. Over the next several days, the transformation began in earnest. The arrest of Captain Peterson spread through the base like wildfire, shocking at first, then sobering. For once, people realized that misconduct wasn't untouchable. Accountability had returned. Sarah's next priority was the logistics chain. She created a cross-department task force, Major Williams from logistics, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from motor pool, and Sergeant Thompson from communications. The goal: streamline procurement, rebuild trust, and eliminate redundant steps. Their first meeting took place in the briefing room, small, windowless, but alive with determination. "Here, the problem," Williams began, gesturing to the board. "Every requisition goes through 4 signatures and 2 systems. It's inefficient and confusing." "Then cut the signatures," Rodriguez said. "Let the people doing the work approve what they need." Thompson added, "And train everyone on the new inventory software. Half the delays happen because no one knows how to use it properly." Sarah listened, arms folded, letting them lead. She didn't dominate the conversation. She directed it gently, guiding where necessary, encouraging where useful. "Make the new process lean," she said finally. "Accountable, not complicated. We'll review it every month, adapt fast, fail faster if needed, just keep learning." Williams smiled faintly. "That's not the kind of order we usually get from above." "Then let's make it the kind we live by," Sarah replied. Meanwhile, morale shifted in subtle ways. Soldiers who once kept their heads down now raised suggestions. Sergeants who'd been cynical about leadership started volunteering solutions. Even in the mess hall, the tone changed. Laughter mixed with conversation about operations and improvement instead of complaints. One afternoon, Sarah visited the motor pool unannounced. The clatter of tools greeted her, along with Rodriguez's booming laugh. He straightened quickly when he saw her. "Ma'am, you didn't have to come down here yourself." "I wanted to see the changes firsthand," she said, scanning the workshop. The vehicles gleamed, organized, repaired, ready. The difference from her first visit was striking. Rodriguez handed her a clipboard. "We finally got the parts we needed. New scheduling systems working, too. Fewer breakdowns, more uptime." Sarah nodded. "You did this, Staff Sergeant, don't forget that." He scratched the back of his head. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "No," she said quietly. "You're redefining what that job means." He smiled, humbled but proud. "Then I'll keep doing that." By the end of the first week, the base felt different, alive again. But Sarah knew better than to mistake momentum for victory. Change was easy to start, hard to sustain. That evening she stood outside the command building, the sunset reflecting off the runway. Major Williams approached, holding a cup of coffee. "Ma'am," she said, offering it, "thought you could use this." Sarah took it with a grateful nod. "How, the task force holding up?" Williams smiled. "Exhausted, motivated, maybe both." They stood in silence for a while, watching a convoy of trucks return from field training. The engines rumbled like distant thunder. "Strange, isn't it?" Williams said finally. "How fast everything changes once people believe they're being seen." Sarah nodded. People don't need perfection from their leaders. They just need to know those leaders see them. Williams looked at her for a moment. "Do you ever get tired of it, ma'am, carrying all that responsibility?" Sarah's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Every day, but tired isn't an excuse, it's a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "That leadership isn't about being right," she said softly. "It's about being responsible, especially when it hurts." Later that night, she walked alone through the quiet corridors of the command wing. Most lights were off. The halls echoed faintly with the hum of distant machinery. She paused by a window overlooking the base. From here it looked peaceful, almost fragile, bathed in silver moonlight. Somewhere out there, soldiers were still working late. Planes still roared faintly from distant hangars. Life went on. She thought of Peterson, not with anger but sadness. The system had failed him too. The silence that had enabled his greed wasn't born overnight. It had been nurtured by years of neglect, a culture that punished truth and rewarded compliance. That would end here. Sarah turned away from the window and returned to her desk, where her next report awaited. She read it twice before setting it aside. At the top of her notes, she wrote a single sentence to herself. "Accountability isn't vengeance. It's respect for everyone who still believes in what's right." By the end of that week, the base had changed more than anyone thought possible. The cracks she'd seen upon arrival weren't gone, but now they were visible, discussed, faced, repaired. And yet, as Sarah prepared for bed that night, she knew this was only the beginning. Real leadership wasn't measured in ceremonies or arrests or policy shifts. It was measured in silence, the kind that came when people stopped fearing mistakes and started trusting the mission again. She sat by her window, the stars reflecting faintly in the glass, and whispered into the dark. "Trust doesn't come from rank, it comes from truth." Then she closed her eyes, letting the night fold around her like the calm before the next storm, because she knew more storms would come. But this time, her people would be ready. Why does progress always invite resistance? Sarah Chen had learned long ago that leadership wasn't about victories. It was about persistence. Her first weeks of command had turned the base into something almost unrecognizable. Supply lines flowed. Morale rose. Departments spoke to each other like living parts of a single organism. The silence that had once haunted the corridors was gone. But success, she knew, never came without pushback. It started quietly, a memo ignored, a meeting delayed. Then came the subtle resistance, the kind that hid behind smiles and perfect salutes. Senior officers who had grown comfortable with the old ways began to push back, claiming her changes disrupted procedure. Bureaucrats in distant offices whispered that her reforms were reckless, too human, unsustainable. And that whisper found its way into the base like a draft under a locked door. One morning, she arrived to find Major Williams waiting at her desk, tension etched into her posture. "Ma'am," Williams said carefully, "I think we have a problem." Sarah set down her briefcase. "Go on." "There's been pushback from regional command about your new logistics framework. They're saying we bypassed too many approval layers." "Bypassed?" Sarah repeated. "We removed redundancy." "Yes, ma'am, but apparently one of those redundant steps belonged to a colonel at Division Supply Command. He's not happy about losing control. Sarah sighed softly. Politics, she said under her breath. The one enemy that never sleeps. Williams nodded grimly. He's requested a review, claims our efficiency comes at the expense of accountability. Then we'll show him both, Sarah replied. Gather the reports, every metric, every improvement. If they want proof, they'll have more than they can handle. Williams hesitated. There's more, ma'am. Some officers are saying the changes are too fast. They're worried morale's improving for the wrong reasons, that people are too comfortable. Sarah looked up sharply. Too comfortable. Yes, ma'am. They think soldiers need pressure to perform. Sarah's tone was calm, but her eyes hardened. Discipline built on fear doesn't last, Major. It just hides the cracks until they explode. She turned to the window. Outside, soldiers were running drills, synchronized, sharp, alive. They call this comfort, she said softly. I call it pride. By midweek, rumors of an inspection spread across the base. Division Command was sending representatives to evaluate Sarah's reforms, a thinly veiled warning that her success had made some people uncomfortable. Jackson, her deputy, brought the news with an apologetic look. They'll arrive tomorrow, ma'am. 2 colonels and a civilian auditor. Officially, it's just a review. Sarah smiled faintly, and unofficially. Unofficially, they're hopping to find something wrong. She nodded. Let them look. Jackson hesitated before speaking again. Admiral, may I say something freely? Always. He leaned forward. What you're doing here, it's working. Everyone can see it, but that's exactly why they'll try to stop you. People like comfort even when it's broken. Sarah's voice was quiet. Then they'll learn what real accountability looks like. The next morning, the inspection team arrived, pressed uniforms, polished badges, and polite skepticism. Colonel Havers, tall and stiff as a flagpole, led the group. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. Admiral Chen, he said, pleasure to finally see the famous reformer in person. Welcome to my base, Colonel, Sarah said evenly. I trust you'll find everything transparent. We intend to, he replied. The day became a performance, clipboards, questions, carefully neutral answers. Havers scrutinized records, measured results, double-checked inventory lists. His expression revealed nothing. By afternoon, they gathered in the conference room for the final review. Your numbers are impressive, Havers admitted. Efficiency's up 30%, costs down 15%, but your procedures, he tapped a pen against the table, they deviate significantly from standard doctrine. Sarah met his gaze calmly. Doctrine isn't scripture, Colonel, it's a framework, and frameworks evolve. The civilian auditor, a thin man with glasses, cleared his throat. Admiral, while innovation is commendable, protocol exists for a reason. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Protocol exists to serve purpose. When it stops serving, it must adapt, or we fail the people it was meant to protect. Havers raised an eyebrow. You speak like someone who believes emotion belongs in command. I believe humanity does, she said simply. Machines follow protocol, people build purpose. The colonel looked at her for a long time before saying quietly, You've made a lot of enemies, Admiral. She smiled faintly. Then I must be doing something right. The inspection ended with no official reprimand, but no praise either. Further review required, they wrote in their report. Sarah read the words that night under her office lamp and smiled. It wasn't approval, but it was survival. Still, the resistance had planted unease among some of her officers. The next day, she overheard 2 lieutenants whispering outside the gym. They say she's too idealistic. Yeah, well, idealism doesn't win wars. Maybe not, but it sure beats corruption. That last voice was unfamiliar, and yet it silenced the others. Sarah didn't turn to see who said it. She didn't need to. Sometimes, small voices carried farther than orders. A week later, the base faced its first real test. At 300 hours, alarms erupted across the compound. Sarah was out of bed before the second siren. A transport convoy en route from a neighboring facility had been ambushed outside the perimeter. No fatalities, but several vehicles were damaged. Communications were patchy, reinforcements scrambling. By the time Sarah reached the command center, her officers were in organized chaos, screens flashing, radios blaring. Jackson was issuing orders. Williams was coordinating supply retrieval. Everyone moved fast, but the tension was palpable. "Status," Sarah demanded. "Convoy Bravo hit an improvised barrier, ma'am," Jackson said. "Unknown hostiles, likely smugglers or local militia. No major injuries, but 2 trucks disabled. Patrol teams en route." Sarah scanned the map on the display. The ambush site was just outside their jurisdiction, a gray area between military control and civilian land. "Do we have confirmation on local law enforcement?" she asked. "They're mobilizing but slow," Williams said. "We'll reach the site first." Sarah nodded. "Send a recovery unit. Maintain perimeter security. No unnecessary engagement." She paused, watching the radar flicker. "And Williams, pull Rodriguez from maintenance. We'll need vehicles ready for rapid deployment if this escalates." "Yes, ma'am." Within minutes, the base transformed. Engines roared to life. Trucks rolled out under floodlights. The organized calm of weeks of reform now faced its first real storm. Sarah stood beside the command console, headset on, listening as radio chatter filled the air. Her voice remained calm, steady, anchoring the chaos. "Convoy Bravo, this is command. Status check." A burst of static, then a response. "Command, this is Bravo leader. Situation under control. Hostiles fled. No pursuit initiated. Request recovery assistance." "Copy that," Sarah said. "Stay put, help's on the way." Jackson looked at her, half smiling. "That went better than expected." Sarah didn't smile back. "First tests always do. It's the aftershock that matters." By dawn, the convoy was safely back inside the base. No casualties, no missing equipment, but one report landed on her desk that caught her attention. The ambush, it turned out, wasn't random. The attackers had known the route and timing, too precisely. Someone had leaked information. Sarah read the report twice, her mind already forming patterns. Her reforms had broken old habits, but not everyone wanted those habits gone. Someone was fighting back from the shadows. She called in Jackson. "I want every outgoing transmission from the past week reviewed. Priority level 1. He nodded grimly. "You think we've got a mole?" "I think we've got someone who misses the comfort of corruption," she replied. "And comfort breeds betrayal." The investigation would take days, but even without answers, something remarkable happened. No one panicked. No one turned cynical. Instead, soldiers doubled their efforts. Departments worked closer. The fear that once spread through rumor now dissolved under quiet confidence. They trusted her completely. Later that evening, Rodriguez stopped by her office, still wearing his oil-stained coveralls. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted to say today felt different. We didn't freeze, we acted." "That's how trust works," Sarah said. "When fear leaves, clarity arrives." He smiled. "Feels good to finally be part of something that makes sense." When the day finally ended, Sarah walked alone across the empty parade ground. The sky above was streaked with fatting light, the kind that turned the world gold and gray at once. She thought about everything she'd seen, the whispers, the reforms, the resistance, the loyalty that had grown from it all. Every piece of it was a test, not of command but of conviction. Because real leadership wasn't about control. It was about the courage to be challenged and still stand. She stopped at the flagpole, the wind tugging gently at her uniform. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished metal base. "I didn't come here to fix a base," she whispered. "I came here to remind it what it could be." And somewhere behind her, she could hear the quiet hum of engines, the laughter of soldiers finishing late shifts, the sound of a place reborn, not perfect, but alive. The next morning, as sunlight spilled over the compound, Sarah looked out from her office window. The base was steady again, resilient. The investigation would uncover its traitor soon enough. But for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. Change had enemies, but it also had believers. And belief, she realized, was the most powerful weapon any leader could wield. She turned back to her desk and began to write, her words deliberate, unhurried. The greatest challenge to leadership isn't resistance. It's the temptation to stop when resistance arrives. She set her pen down, letting the ink dry. Outside, the flag rose with the morning breeze. She had walked onto this base as a stranger. She would leave it as its standard. What happens when betrayal doesn't come from your enemies, but from those you trusted to carry your vision forward? 3 days after the ambush, the investigation reached its breaking point. The communications audit had uncovered something: encrypted transmissions sent from inside the base, just hours before the convoy's departure. The signal wasn't strong, but it was deliberate, routed through internal channels only someone with access could exploit. Sarah Chen stood in her office, hands clasped behind her back as the security chief briefed her. "We traced the signal to the communications wing," he said, voice tight. "Specifically, workstation C-14. Access credentials belong to Sergeant Daniel Thompson." The words hit like a soft punch. Thompson. The same Thompson who'd stayed late fixing systems no one else could. The same man who had worked beside her during her undercover week, proud, honest, kind. She exhaled slowly. "You're certain?" "Absolutely, ma'am. His credentials, his station. We verified timestamps. No signs of external breach." Sarah nodded, though her expression didn't shift. "Where is he now?" "In custody, awaiting questioning." Her gaze turned toward the window. Outside, the sky was pale gray, the kind that dulled everything it touched. "Bring him here," she said quietly. 10 minutes later, Thompson stood in her office, unshaven, uniform wrinkled, confusion and shame fighting across his face. 2 MPs flanked him, but Sarah gestured for them to wait outside. "Sit," she said. He obeyed without protest. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said, voice cracking. They said the transmission came from my terminal, but I swear I didn't." Sarah raised a hand. "Take a breath, Sergeant." He did. His fingers twitched nervously on his knees. "Let's start simple," she said. "Did anyone else have access to your station?" "No, ma'am. I lock it every time I leave. Password rotates daily." "Then explain how a coded transmission left this base from your login." Thompson's throat bobbed as he swallowed. I don't know. I swear, Admiral, I didn't send anything. You can check my logs. I was off shift that night. My wife, she called me about our daughter's fever. I left early. Ask anyone." Sarah's expression remained unreadable. "You're saying someone used your credentials?" "Yes, ma'am, they must have." She studied him for a long moment. His eyes didn't dart. His breathing was fast but even. No obvious tells of deceit. And yet, truth and guilt often looked identical under fear. "You understand the severity of this," she said quietly. "The convoy could have been destroyed. People could have died." "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. "If I thought for a second I was responsible for that." He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Sarah watched him carefully. "I want to believe you, Sergeant, but belief doesn't replace evidence." He nodded, tears edging his voice. "Then find the evidence, please, because I didn't do this." She dismissed him gently. "You'll remain confined until we finish the investigation. If you're telling the truth, I'll prove it." When he left, Sarah sat in silence. The ache behind her sternum wasn't anger, it was disappointment. Not in him. In the possibility that either way, someone good was about to break. That night she stayed long after the lights dimmed. The base was quiet, almost hauntingly so. Files and data streams covered her desk, access logs, security footage, communication records. Every lead was another dead end. At 2300 hours, Major Williams entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You're still here," she said softly. "So are you," Sarah replied. Williams set the coffee down. "You think it's him?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But the timing, the access, it all fits too perfectly, too conveniently." "Meaning?" "Meaning," Sarah said, eyes narrowing. "Someone wanted it to look like him." Williams frowned. "Framed." Sarah nodded. "Thompson's logs show manual login at 22:17, but security footage shows him leaving the building at 21:40. Either he's a liar or someone used a cloned keycard." Williams leaned forward. "Can we check entry logs?" "Already did. The system shows his card entering the comm wing at 22:15. So someone copied his ID." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "Exactly. And that narrows our suspect pool to maybe half a dozen people with access to that equipment." Williams hesitated. "Any names stand out?" "One," Sarah said quietly, "Lieutenant Vale." Williams blinked. "Communications supervisor." "Yes, he was close with Peterson, transferred from the same division 6 months ago. He had reason to fear the reforms, and he oversees ID authorization." Williams exhaled. "If that's true, ma'am." Sarah finished her thought. Then this wasn't betrayal, it was sabotage. By dawn, Sarah had a plan. She ordered the comm system placed under temporary lockdown, and a digital forensic team began reconstructing the cloned ID trail. Within hours, confirmation came. Vale's login patterns showed hidden overrides, backdoor commands embedded in the security system. He'd used Thompson's ID as cover, sent the transmission, and erased traces. Almost erased. When the evidence packet hit her desk, Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, then stood. "Get him," she said. They brought Vale in at noon. He was composed, even smug. "Admiral Chen," he greeted with a faint smile. "I was wondering when we'd talk." Sarah motioned for him to sit. "You've been busy," she said, "tampering with security, sending transmissions to external channels, endangering lives." He chuckled. "Endangering, please. That convoy wasn't hit by hostiles, it was staged." Sarah's brow furrowed slightly. "Staged." "Smugglers, yes, but no gunfire, no losses. I just wanted to prove how fragile your new system is. One small signal and chaos follows. You call that progress?" Her tone cooled. "You compromised operational security to prove a point." "I exposed the flaw in your philosophy," Vale said sharply. "You think emotion and trust can replace control. You're wrong. The military runs on obedience, not empathy. The moment you forget that, you lose everything." Sarah studied him, really studied him. The bitterness, the brittle arrogance, the fear hiding behind intellectual pride. "You mistake fear for order," she said quietly, "and obedience for loyalty. But loyalty can't be coerced, it's earned." He smirked, spoken like someone who's never faced real dissent. Sarah leaned forward slightly. "I've faced worse. I've faced silence, the kind you weaponize to keep others afraid." Vale's smirk faded. "Your era ends today," she said simply. She ordered his arrest. The MPs escorted him out without a word. Later that evening, Sarah visited the detention area where Thompson sat, hands clasped, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. When she entered, he stood automatically. "Sergeant," she said softly, "you're cleared." He blinked. "Ma'am." "You were framed. Vale used your credentials. The transmission wasn't yours." His knees nearly gave out. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Sarah said. "You kept your integrity when the world told you you'd lost it. That matters more than any system we build." He looked at her with eyes wet but steady. "Thank you, ma'am. for believing enough to check. She smiled faintly. Belief without proof is faith, but leadership means finding proof when faith is all you have left. As she turned to leave, he stopped her. "Ma'am, why risk it? You could have let them court-martial me and moved on." Sarah looked back, her voice soft, because truth deserves effort, always. That night the entire base felt the ripple. Word spread fast, Vale arrested, Thompson exonerated. For the first time in months, the base wasn't just functioning, it was united. In the mess hall, soldiers raised their glasses in quiet toasts. They didn't celebrate vengeance. They celebrated justice done right. Major Williams stopped by Sarah's office again near midnight. He confessed fully, ma'am, said he wanted to restore discipline through chaos. Sarah nodded. Fear disguises itself as order. He couldn't see past it. Williams hesitated. "You could have made an example of him, public punishment. Instead, you ordered private confinement." "Examples don't teach," Sarah said. "They intimidate, and intimidation is what got us here in the first place." Williams smiled faintly. "You really believe compassion can coexist with command, don't you?" Sarah's voice softened. "Not just coexist, it's what gives command its meaning." When the base finally went quiet again, Sarah stepped outside. The wind was cool, carrying the faint hum of generators and distant laughter from the barracks. The stars above glowed sharp against the dark, clearer than they'd been in weeks. She thought about Peterson, Vale, Thompson. 3 men, each a reflection of what leadership could become when twisted or neglected or trusted. Every leader, she realized, stood at that crossroads daily, between control and compassion, between silence and truth. She whispered into the quiet air. "Discipline without understanding breeds fear, but discipline with empathy breeds strength." Her reflection in the glass of the command building didn't look like the woman who'd arrived undercover. She looked like someone carrying the weight of choices that no medal could honor. And yet there was peace in her eyes. Because leadership, she knew now, wasn't about standing above others. It was about standing with them, even when the world demanded distance. Tomorrow she would face more challenges, more politics, more battles not fought with weapons but with conviction. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of stillness beneath the stars, where the only sound was the quiet certainty that she'd chosen right. What do you leave behind when your mission ends? Fear, obedience, or something deeper? The days after Lieutenant Vale's arrest were calm, almost unnaturally so. The base that once lived in tension now breathed freely again. The hum of engines, the rhythm of drills, the low laughter spilling from the mess hall, each sound carried a quiet pride. Discipline had returned, not through punishment but through purpose. For the first time in months, no one was afraid of being seen. Sarah Chen stood on the balcony outside her office one morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise burn through the mist over the airfield. Jets sat in perfect lines, their silver wings glinting like mirrors. Beyond them, soldiers moved with measured energy, focused, grounded. The base had become what it was meant to be, a living organism of trust and precision. Williams joined her, a soft rustle of uniform fabric announcing her presence. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "Division Command just sent confirmation. They've reviewed our reforms and approved every change. Full authorization." Sarah turned, surprise flickering across her face. "All of them." "All of them," Williams said, smiling. "No more reviews, no more threats. We're officially cleared." For the first time in weeks, Sarah let out a small laugh, a brief, weary exhale of relief. "You realize what that means, Major?" Williams grinned. "It means we won." Sarah's gaze drifted back toward the horizon. "No," she said softly. "It means we started something worth protecting." The rest of the day unfolded in quiet efficiency. Meetings, debriefs, training assessments. It was routine, the kind of routine she'd fought to restore. Yet beneath the calm, Sarah felt something shifting inside her. Every command, every signature, every policy now carried a strange finality. She had built this place from silence into strength, from fear into unity. But leadership wasn't ownership. It was stewardship. Sooner or later she would leave, and they would have to stand without her. Late that afternoon, as she reviewed the final report for the command chain, a message flashed on her console. Subject: Command Transfer Directive. Origin: Fleet Operations, Central Command. Contents: Admiral Sarah Chen is hereby reassigned to Strategic Operations Command, Pacific Sector, effective immediately. Transition period: 72 hours. She read it twice before leaning back, eyes on the ceiling. The order wasn't unexpected, but the timing struck her like a quiet ache. 3 days. 3 days to hand over everything she'd rebuilt. That evening she called a staff meeting, small, private. Williams, Jackson, Rodriguez, and Thompson sat around the table. The 4 people who had, in different ways, carried her mission when no one else believed in it. She didn't sugarcoat it. "I've been reassigned," she said simply. 3 days from now, command will pass to Major Williams." The room went still. Williams blinked, stunned. "Ma'am, I didn't know." "You earned it," Sarah said. "Every reform we made, every system that stands, it's because you led from where you were, not from what you were called." Jackson leaned forward, disbelief etched in his features. "With respect, Admiral, this base needs you." "No," Sarah said gently. "It needs what I taught you, and that's different." Rodriguez's voice was soft. "Feels like we just got started, ma'am." "We did," she said, "and you'll finish it together." Thompson, still recovering from the ordeal that nearly ruined him, looked at her like someone seeing sunlight after months underground. "You believed in us when no one else did," he said quietly. "How do we keep that alive when you're gone?" Sarah smiled faintly. "You don't keep me alive, Sergeant. You keep the truth alive. That's all that ever mattered." They sat in silence for a long moment. No one moved. No one wanted to. The next morning, the announcement went public. The news spread across the base like a quiet ripple, disbelief at first, then sadness. The same people who once ignored her now felt the weight of her absence before it even happened. Everywhere she walked that day, heads turned. Salutes held longer than usual. Voices softened when they spoke her name. That evening, as the sun dropped low over the runway, the base gathered for a farewell formation. Rows of soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, uniforms crisp, boots gleaming. The wind tugged gently at the flags above them. Colonel Harrison, her predecessor, had returned for the ceremony. He stepped to the podium first, his voice echoing through the courtyard. "When Admiral Chen arrived here, she didn't take command," he said. "She earned it, not through rank but through truth. She reminded us that strength doesn't come from fear, it comes from trust, and this base will never forget that." He stepped back, motioning for her to speak. Sarah took her place before the crowd, the setting sun casting a soft amber glow across her face. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking in the sight, the faces of people who had once doubted her, now looking at her with gratitude. When she spoke, her voice was calm, even, but every word carried weight. "When I first came here," she began, "I didn't come to lead, I came to listen." The crowd was silent. "I saw a base that had forgotten itself, not because of weakness but because no one felt seen. I saw soldiers who wanted to serve but had no one to trust, and I learned that sometimes leadership isn't about commanding others. It's about reminding them who they already are." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "Over these months, you rebuilt not just a system, but a spirit. You turned fear into focus, doubt into unity. And if you remember nothing else from my time here, remember this: strength built on silence crumbles, but strength built on trust endures." She let the words settle before continuing, voice softening. "I am not this base's success. You are. Every decision, every correction, every small act of courage you made when no one was watching, That's what keeps this place alive. Don't lose that. Don't wait for permission to do what's right. She hesitated, emotion flickering through her usually composed eyes. And when the next leader comes, and they will, don't judge them by their title. Judge them by their silence. See who listens before they speak. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, somewhere in the back, a soldier started clapping, slow, steady. It spread, wave after wave, until the sound filled the air like thunder. But it wasn't the applause of celebration. It was the sound of respect, the kind that came only when people truly understood what they were losing. That night Sarah walked the perimeter alone one last time. The stars stretched endlessly overhead. The air was cool, carrying the scent of metal, jet fuel, and the faint sweetness of grass beyond the fences. Every corner of the base told a story. The hangars, where she'd first watched the mechanics struggle with broken tools. The depot, where corruption once hid in plain sight. The barracks, where laughter had replaced silence. She stopped by the communications wing. Thompson's light was still on. Through the window, she could see him helping a younger soldier debug a terminal, patient and calm. The sight made her smile. Leadership had passed on, not through ceremony but through imitation. Back in her office, she packed her few belongings. A mug, a single photo of her early naval days, and the small notebook she'd carried since her first command. Its pages were filled with scribbles, thoughts, fragments of lessons learned through scars and silence alike. At the very end, she wrote one last line. Real command is not given. It's earned every day through every small act of dignity that no one else sees. She closed the notebook and placed it in her bag. Then she turned one last time toward the window, watching as the lights of the base flickered like constellations across the ground. Somewhere out there, the night patrols moved with quiet purpose. The world kept turning, and so would they. Her comm device buzzed, a call from fleet operations confirming her transport at dawn. She acknowledged it briefly, then set it aside. Before leaving, she paused at the door, running her fingers lightly over the nameplate on her desk. Admiral Sarah Chen. Tomorrow it would bear someone else's name, and that was how it should be. The following morning, as the first rays of light touched the horizon, a transport jet waited on the tarmac. Sarah stood beside it, cap in hand. Williams, Jackson, Rodriguez, and Thompson were there to see her off. Rodriguez tried to speak first but failed. His throat tightened. "Ma'am, you changed everything." Sarah smiled gently. "No, Sergeant, you did. I just gave you permission to remember how." Williams stepped forward, eyes glistening. "I'll try not to disappoint you." "You won't," Sarah said. "Just don't forget what got us here. Honesty, not hierarchy." Thompson gave a small salute, a mix of pride and sorrow in his eyes. "We'll make you proud, ma'am." "You already have," she said softly. Jackson, always the pragmatic one, managed a half-smile. "You're leaving us better than you found us." "That's all any leader can hope for," she replied. As she climbed the ramp, she looked back one last time. The four of them stood together in the early morning light, different ranks, different paths, united now by something stronger than orders. She gave one final salute, then disappeared into the aircraft. The engines roared to life, the jet rolling down the runway before lifting gracefully into the sky. For a long while, the four officers stood watching until it vanished beyond the clouds. High above, as the horizon spread endlessly before her, Sarah sat by the window, the light catching her reflection. She didn't feel triumph or sadness, just peace, the kind that came when you given everything and left something better behind. Her thoughts drifted, not to reports or medals or titles, but to the people she'd met, the laughter in the mess hall, the long nights spent rebuilding broken systems, the quiet nods of trust from those who once turned away. She closed her eyes and let herself remember what it all meant. Not command, not victory, but humanity. Because in the end, Leadership wasn't about changing others. It was about giving them the strength to change themselves. The jet soared higher, the clouds spreading like waves beneath her. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself one last truth she'd carried through every storm. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.